I want to start with you, Phil, because you're a former law enforcement officer, and the demands that are being put on this ICE agent by the local authorities, by the Democrats, by the protesters in the streets, that like in that split second, he should have assessed that she didn't really want to run him over, that possibly he wasn't in mortal danger, that really there was no need to fire because maybe it was just going to be a gentle run over, something maybe just a foot and not his entire body. Especially now that we know this same guy got dragged 100 yards 6 months ago at a different ICE stop and was seriously injured. Like it's completely irrational, and it's not consistent with the legal standard that's going to get applied to this case.
No, and I want to talk about that legal standard because what we have seen, once again, as we typically do in law enforcement shootings, is we see the left and those on social media looking at this through the 2020 hindsight versus the objective analysis that's supposed to apply. And look, we see this breathless hysteria also setting in rather than this calm, thoughtful legal analysis. And I might say, before I tell you that legal analysis, I want to point out Jacob Fry, the mayor there. I wonder if he's like certifiably insane in light of his abhorrent comments that were clearly designed to fan the flames of this hysteria. The Supreme Court told us in a number of cases, but really the seminal case involving use of force is Graham versus Connor from 1989. And they clearly said specifically in their ruling that all police use of force must be reasonable, and that reasonableness must be judged, listen to this, from the perspective of the officer on the scene, from the officer you just showed in those videos in front of that car, hearing that revving of that engine, seeing those tires spinning, and having been through this before and hospitalized and damn near killed. We're supposed to look at it from his perspective, not the 2020 lens of hindsight, because these officers, as the court tells us correctly, because I've been there, these are split-second judgments. These are tense, uncertain. They are rapidly evolving circumstances. And lots of factors have to be considered, such as what is the suspected crime, whether the suspect poses an immediate threat of safety to not only the officer's safety, but others in the area. And we saw other officers there. We saw civilians there. There's no telling what this woman might do if she's allowed to just gun it and start tearing out of there with her foot jammed to the floor of the accelerator. And so all of those things have to be taken into consideration. And that's what we call objective reasonableness, not the 2020 hindsight that we see coming from all of the breathless hysteria on the left. But that is the law, and it's a shame we can't wait for an investigation to reveal all these things before you have the mayor and the governor come out there making these really, really reckless and inflammatory statements.
Here's a little of Jacob Fry, the mayor. Last night, he went on Anderson Cooper and kept the absurdity of what he did is going to be obvious to all three of you. I'm going to let it play, and then I'll get your reaction. Listen to this, Out 2.
There's obviously a huge disagreement about what the videos show. Have you completely made up your mind, or do you still have questions?
I'm not going to preempt the investigation that will be taking place, but I got two eyes. I mean, what you saw was the victim taking at least like a 3-point turn. This was clearly not with any sort of intention to run somebody over. You don't need a legal degree to know that that does not authorize the use of deadly force. That being said, again, I'm not going to preempt an investigation. That being said, again, the narrative that ICE is spinning immediately after this was that this was purely self-defense, and I'll say it again, is bullshit.
I'm not gonna prejudge anything, but everything DHS is saying is bullshit. Just for a good measure, he did it again with Caitlin Collins in an equally absurd moment. Let's play that, SOT 10.
After you told ICE to get the F out of the city, I've seen a lot of Republicans here in Washington criticizing those comments, saying that you're escalating tensions with that.
I'm so sorry if I offended their Disney princess ears. On the one hand, you got someone who dropped an F-bomb, and on the other hand, you got someone who killed somebody else. F-bomb, killing somebody. I think the more inflammatory action is killing somebody. You should also understand the importance of de-escalating tense situations, not killing people and yanking out a gun.
De-escalating.
And so, again, I'm not going to preempt the investigation.
I mean, I wonder, Ashley, how you de-escalate when somebody's ramming their car at you.
Right.
Like, what in that split second? Do you just say, like, please? Do you make the prayer symbol with your hands?
Right.
Like, what exactly are these cops supposed to do?
Well, and that's one of the things I keep thinking about. How could he have de-escalated the situation at that point? And was it reasonable? Really what we're looking at, and everyone's talking about when this goes to court, if this goes to court, there's two different ways it could go to court. I think it's important to sort of distinguish the two different ways. One is a civil case, if the family of the deceased filed a civil lawsuit. The other is a criminal case, if this officer was charged. And I don't think either of those are likely to be successful. And the reason is that, the standard that Phil talked about, this reasonableness standard, that's a civil standard. So the 11th Amendment says you cannot sue the government unless the government says you can sue them. And there's certain carve-outs. And one of those is for excessive use of force. And that's what you were just asking about, this de-escalation. Did they have to actually use de-escalation techniques, or was this authorized? And what the law also says is that you can take into account all of this officer's experience. And Justice Kagan said that in a very recent opinion, that you can take into account that this officer had been a victim of another brutal car crash, car running down, something like that. And
dragging.
Yes, dragging, exactly. So what's in that officer's mind? What's reasonable in his mind? The other instance is if he was charged criminally. And when I see the mayor, all I'm thinking about is they're going to try and do some type of criminal charges. That's immediately what I'm thinking, because we've got this significant tension between state authorities, local authorities, and the federal government. And all we're hearing from everybody local is, we want you out, we want to prosecute. So I'm thinking their probably next step is going to be to try to use some type of a criminal case, something against this officer. And he's going to be in a position where he's got to defend himself and use self-defense as a theory. So he's had to defend himself in person. Now he's going to have to defend himself in court. But I think he'll be successful. I mean, this was clearly self-defense. Would a reasonable officer have thought that he was in fear for his safety, or other people's safety? And I want to point out, you were talking about something about how the mainstream media has sort of portrayed this. I like to sort of play a game with myself where I look at the mainstream media articles and then I go and I actually try to find the videos and I try to compare what I think happened to what I think after I actually look at all the videos. And my opinion significantly changed. And it always does, and I let it on purpose. I don't say anything. I don't make a firm opinion when I see just the reports. But my opinion changed significantly because everybody was shown a very, very edited clip, and it wasn't the whole, It wasn't all the clips. Yeah, and the clips that you showed a few minutes ago tells a very different story. When you see the other side of what happened, it is a whole different ballgame for me. And I think it's a whole different ballgame for everybody.
Agree.
Yeah, and I wonder if the mayor has actually seen all of those things, and if he knows about what this officer had suffered from before. And I'll tell you, that's coming from someone who, we file civil rights cases against officers when they are in the wrong. So, we are regularly in this office evaluating this standard and talking about it. And does it rise to that level? Do I wish it would have ended differently? Of course. But do I wish that the officers weren't in that situation in the first place? Yes. Do I wish that everybody handled it after differently? Yes, 100%. But that doesn't mean that it's illegal, doesn't mean that it's a crime, doesn't mean that it's something that rises to a case for a civil lawsuit either.
Dave Aronberg, you're a recovering prosecutor. And, my understanding is that this is not going to be a state case at all because of the supremacy clause, because you have a federal officer performing a federal duty, and that if the state tried to indict him, the feds would assert jurisdiction over this and then would probably dismiss the case, and ultimately Trump might pardon him on federal charges. But we heard just today, this morning, that the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension just revealed that federal officials have reversed course, because originally I guess they were sitting back and letting the state handle things. And the investigation into the killing of this woman will be conducted by the FBI without the assistance of the local state authorities. And this relates, I'm told, back to 1890 Supreme Court case in Nagel, which established that states generally lack jurisdiction to prosecute a federal officer for actions taken within the scope of their official federal duties, a principle derived from the supremacy clause. So your thoughts on whether the locals, as angry as they may be, will have a shot at this officer?
Megyn, good to be with you and my colleagues, Ashley and Phil. You mentioned a key phrase, within the scope of their official duties. That gets the local authorities the ability to prosecute if they say that he was not acting within the scope of his official duties, it was not reasonable, and they could move ahead and prosecute. The feds would perhaps try to assert jurisdiction and take over the case, but the state does have the right to move forward with it, and then it would go into state court. What would happen, because he's a federal official, it would get removed to federal court, so you'd have a federal judge, and you'd have a jury pool that would be from the entire state of Minnesota, not just from that one area. And so there are advantages to going into federal court. The judge would not be a local elected judge. It'd be a federal appointed judge for life. So no, the state is not out of this entirely. In fact, state law makes it easier to prosecute a law enforcement officer after George Floyd than federal law does. So I do think that the state,
but only if they have jurisdiction. I mean, that exception, Dave, is for a cop who is not acting within the official scope of his duty. So you're talking about somebody who's like driving to the movie theater and behaves like a moron, or decides to make some arrest in his off-duty time, and he handles it poorly, and it's an ex-girlfriend, and he behaves inappropriately. Then you can make the argument he wasn't acting within the scope of his official duties, and we can go for him. There's no question this guy was acting within the scope of his official duties here. The state's not going to win that argument. This, if at all, will be a federal case, which is very good for him.
Well, it's up to the judge to decide whether or not the state can make its case that this was so outside any reasonable test that he is not acting within his scope, and he could have easily just walked aside. He didn't have to shoot into the car. You know, it's interesting how different people seeing this video, it's like a Rorschach test to see how they interpret it. The law does allow, and I've done a lot of these cases, Megyn, as state attorney, because I have to review these cases at the local level. We had about 100 of them. And I would say, based on what I saw, that there's enough here to at least take it to a grand jury and let them make a decision. I don't think it's as clear cut as Kristi Noem or you guys have been saying. By the way, just if I can go back to Kristi Noem, I agree with Phil and with Ashley that I wish that our elected officials would have handled this differently. We need someone to take down the temperature, and they're just ratcheting it up. And that includes Secretary Noem. To be fair, I mean, she said that she instantly started blaming Biden and the locals, and she said that Ms. Good weaponized her vehicle and intentionally attempted to run a law enforcement officer over and ram them. I think it's a little premature to say that. I didn't see that in my video. I saw that she was trying to drive away. She was given an order to stop. She was given conflicting orders. One said stop, another said get out. And she was trying to drive away. The wheels were turning. So I'm not so sure that there was a real risk.
Get out is not inconsistent with stop. Get out of the fucking car is what they said.
Well,
that's not inconsistent with stop. A new year means new financial goals, like making sure your savings are secure and diversified. Will this be the year you decide to talk to someone from Birch Gold Group? They use an educational approach with a deep understanding of macroeconomics. There are forces pushing the dollar lower and gold higher, which is why they believe every American should own physical gold. So until January 30th, if you're a first-time gold buyer, Birch Gold is offering a rebate of up to $10,000 on qualifying purchases. To claim eligibility and start the process, you just text MK to the number 989898. Birch Gold can help you roll an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in gold, and you are still eligible for a rebate of up to $10,000. Consider making right now your first time to buy gold and take advantage of a rebate up to $10,000 when you buy before January 30th. Text MK to the number 989898. Claim your eligibility today. Again, text MK to 989898. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.